1,000 Autumns of Mohua. Chapter 1, Past and Present Lives. In an ancient kingdom called Chaoyang, there was a woman named Chiwalin, who was born into a scholarly family, but died in an accident. Her life was full of turbulence, but it ended quietly in an unknown illness. Her death was not the end, but a new chapter for her soul. A chance. The system's voice rang out, with an extremely calm tone, you will be given another chance to complete an unfinished mission. As the voice dissipated, Weilin felt like she was being carried away by a powerful force, traveling through time and space. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself in a completely unfamiliar world. She was lying on a palatial bed, surrounded by extravagant decorations that were not only extravagant, but also had a strong royal atmosphere. The words echoed in her mind, unfinished business. Chapter 2, First Encounter with the Prince. Weilin's identity is not idle. She found that she had traveled to ancient times and became the daughter of an official family named Chi Mulian. At this time, news of the court swept in like a thunderbolt, and it was heard that the young prince of the dynasty, Solong, would marry her. This marriage was not what she wanted, but she couldn't resist it. The Prince of Sohao, young and handsome, wise and resolute, is the hope of the country's future. However, for Weilin, the beginning of this marriage was an unpredictable thread of fate that bound her tightly. When they first met, Weilin didn't take Solong to heart. She already has her own life plan in her heart, and she doesn't plan to be attached to any man. But Su Hao is not the cold-blooded and ruthless she imagined, he is gentle and elegant, and he always treats her like a gentleman. His words were gentle and his demeanor was graceful, as if she were familiar with her previous life. One day, Weilin sat opposite Su Hao, and he said softly, Mulian, are you willing to give me a chance to accompany you through every road in the future? This sentence pierced her heart like a sharp sword, making her feel as if she had nowhere to escape. Chapter 3, Betrayal and Betrayal. The days after marriage were not as dull as she expected, but full of surprises and challenges. Sutaki's affection for her makes her feel more and more conflicted. She was originally indifferent to this marriage, but Solong's sincerity was intertwined with her doubts, and her heart gradually changed. However, behind the favor lies a political struggle. In the court, many well-intentioned people touched her weaknesses and secretly acted one after another. When the queen's position was proposed again, Weilin felt an irresistible crisis. She knew that her position, and that delicate position of power, did not belong to her entirely. One night, she learned the news, Su Hao is not the only prince. In a deep palace infighting, another prince named Li Junyuan quietly rose and secretly competed for the throne. None of this has anything to do with her, but she becomes a pawn in this power game. Weilin, who was in a melancholy mood, was strolling in the courtyard when she was suddenly summoned into the depths of the palace by a concubine. The concubine's name was Ling Ziyan, a woman who had a great desire for the throne. Ling Ziyan suggested that if Weilin was willing to assist her, she could ensure that Weilin's status was not threatened, and even allow her to sit on a higher throne. Behind all this conspiracy, there are hidden secrets, and when she finally learns the truth, it is too late to change. Chapter 4, Poisoning and Death. At a grand palace banquet, Weilin was injured by a poisonous hand, and the toxins in her body quickly attacked. She died in agony, and the last sight before her was her grief-stricken face. He held her in his arms, tears sliding down her cheeks, as if to bring her back to the warmth of her life. You can't die. Su Hao whispered sadly. However, life has come to an end. Her eyes slowly closed, and with her death, the whole world fell silent. Chapter 5, The Selection of Tasks. After her death, Weilin heard the familiar voice again, you have two choices. The cold tone of the system echoed in her ears again, 1. Let you be resurrected, continue to assist Ming Jun, and make the country prosperous and become a famous queen through the ages. 2. Go back to your time, let it all go, and start over. Weilin was silent, her heart full of struggle. Back in modern times, she may be able to live an ordinary life again, but in that case, she will give up all history, all influences. And choosing to resurrect means that she needs to face that shadowy crisis again, and there is no guarantee that she can even change her fate. After a moment of contemplation, she finally made her choice. Chapter 6, Back to the Modern Age. Weilin took a deep breath and chose to let go of everything in the past and return to her own time. Returning to that familiar world, she regained her life, but could not return to that ancient kingdom full of waves. However, just as she prepares to accept reality, she discovers that she is not completely far from the past in the modern world. History, it seems, is still quietly changing. And the lifelike who once had a deep influence on her, is also waiting for her to meet again in a corner. Chapter 7, The Opportunity for Rebirth. Weilin is back in the modern day, and everything in front of her is like a dream. When she walked out of the hospital gate, the cold wind blew by, and she couldn't help but shiver. The modern world is still busy, people come and go, and the lights are bright, but there is an unspeakable emptiness in her heart. Those things that have happened, whether it is the struggle in the palace, the interweaving of power, or the deep eyes of Suhao, are still as clear as images. She returned to her little apartment, and the silence of the room was a little bewildered as the door closed. Looking at the city lights outside the window, Weilin felt an indescribable loneliness. She is no longer the noble daughter of the ancient dynasty, nor the queen who is favored by thousands of people, but an ordinary modern woman, facing countless unknown futures. Just as she was in this deep muse, her phone suddenly lit up. It was a message from a friend asking if she was ready to start over. It was the only connection she had since she returned to the modern era, and it gave her a little comfort. Weilin's fingers stayed on the screen for a moment, and then she clicked on WeChat and flipped through the messages casually. Suddenly, a message from an unfamiliar number caught her attention. You chose to go back to the modern age, but it's not over. The message was unsigned, without any specific explanation, just a disturbing word. Weilin's heart raced, and she felt that there seemed to be some hint hidden in that sentence. Chapter 8, The Re-Interweaving of Fates. A month later, Weilin found that she couldn't escape the influence from antiquity. The dullness of everyday life did not calm her, on the contrary, she kept dreaming the same dreams, always of the old palace, the lifelike face, and the inevitable death. She began to realize that her adjustment to modern life was not as smooth as expected, and she had a strong desire to return to that time of passion and challenge. She was even confused by certain details, always feeling that the surrounding environment, people's eyes, and even some words had a certain sense of familiarity. And what she couldn't ignore the most was the secret message behind that strange message. Who is behind her fate? Was her rebirth just for a larger mission? The answer to all this seems to point to the past that she has forgotten. One day, Weilin decided to track down the source of this message. She carefully recalled whether she had ever been exposed to something related to modern technology when she first traveled to ancient times. She began to look up all the information from that time, and found that she had some kind of intersection with an organization called Project Mirage. This institution specializes in experiments across time and space, and secretly conducts experiments on souls and time. A chill ran through Weilin's heart. She realized that her crossing might not be a simple accident, but part of a larger plan. Has she become a pawn in this plan? And how will her choices affect the future? Chapter 9, New Challenges. Just when Weilin's thoughts were in turmoil, she stumbled upon the news of Solong. Unexpectedly, he also traveled to modern times. This is not just a dream, this seems to be the arrangement of fate. Su Hao, the prince who once had countless powers in the court, actually came to the world she lived in. It's just that his identity is not as prominent as he was at the beginning, but he has become an ordinary young man who lives in the same city as Weilin. Weilin couldn't believe her eyes. She found Su Hao, he didn't seem to recognize her, she was still living an ordinary life, but those eyes were still full of deep power. Lifelike? She asked in a low voice. Su Hao turned his head and frowned slightly. There seemed to be a slight strangeness in his eyes, but when his eyes met Weilin's eyes, his expression was slightly stunned. It was as if for a short moment, some kind of familiar light flashed in his eyes. You? He asked. Weilin felt a pang of heartache. It wasn't the first time they'd met, and he didn't seem to recognize her in his eyes. What's going on here? Could it be that the modern lifelike and the past are not the same person? Or, was his memory erased by some force? She couldn't help but feel a shock in her heart, and she could barely suppress the urge in her heart. We've seen it before, A long time ago her words suddenly froze, unable to continue. Solong's expression became complicated, and he was silent for a moment before finally speaking. I seem to have some vague memories of what you said. Have we ever known each other? At this moment, Weilin deeply felt an inexplicable sense of loss. It seems that everything about her in this world has completely changed. Life's memories, her past, and even their fate seem to have been rewoven by some unknown force. Chapter 10, The Cycle of History. Although Sulong no longer has the same deep feelings for her as she once did, Weilin still can't let go of thinking about the past. She couldn't understand why the fate between her and Sotaki was so complicated, and why the cycle of history always involved them. In the days that followed, Weilin gradually learned that none of this was accidental. The intrigues experienced in the palace, the struggle for power, may be part of fate. The unfinished mission she has completed is not a simple end, but the beginning of this conspiracy that transcends time and space. Weilin begins to investigate the fantasy project and discovers that the truth behind it is far more terrifying than she imagined. This is a project about soul transformation and historical rewriting, in order to try to control the fate of mankind and change the course of history. And she is the key person in this plan. At this time, a surge of determination welled up in her heart. Whether it is the past or the future, whether it is an ancient court or a modern city, she will do her best to change the chess game of this fate. The road ahead is still full of unknowns.